Amid the debate over health care, Vice President Mike Pence met last night with pro-life groups for the second time since taking office. In a tweet, the vice president said, grateful to host pro-life leaders today and reaffirm President Trump's commitment to the sanctity of life in the Obamacare repeal and replacement plan. Joining us now is Reverend Dean Nelson, National Outreach Director for Human Coalition, a pro-life advocacy group who was at the meeting last night. So Reverend Nelson, the Vice President's office put out a statement about the meeting saying the focus was on ensuring the sanctity of human life. In respect for that, when you're talking about repealing and replacing Obamacare, what do you think needs to happen to make sure that that does happen?
Well, it was a great meeting. We all know that we have a wonderful pro-life vice president, pro-life president. I think from Human Coalition's vantage point with the women's clinics that we have around the country, our commitment is always protecting and preserving life and serving women. We believe firmly that the Hyde Amendment, which has been a long-standing provision and a way to evaluate pieces of legislation as to whether or not it is pro-life or not, is the primary thing is anything that comes across the president's desk ultimately should not have any provisions for abortion in it, using the Hyde Amendment essentially as that litmus test.
Well, this pro-life meeting with the vice president is a huge step forward, especially after the last 8 years when pro-life groups were essentially ignored by the White House. But there are certainly still lots of concerns, tax credits in the House Republican plan that would, whether or not they'd be used to fund abortions or not. What are your concerns there?
Sure, and this was a serious conversation that occurred last night. And we did get assurance from the vice president that they would do everything that they can to make sure that those things are not included. So I would say that our concerns right now are that people who would be in your listening audience would make their voices heard, that they would actually contact their congressman to make sure that in this provision, because they're still tweaking it a little bit from different offices, but they would make sure that there would be no provision at all in this new health care plan.
Well, speaking of tweaks and improvements, the vice president also says he's asked for suggestions on this about improving health care. What, in general, when you think about health care, do you think that lawmakers need to think about as they hash out a repeal?
Sure. I mean, obviously, Obamacare was a huge piece of legislation. So there are a lot of details to fetter through. But our primary concern is that as they look through it, if there are tax credits that are made available, if there are other pieces of the legislation, for there are a lot of organizations like ours that were negatively impacted by Obamacare just because of the increase that it has cost, small businesses and organizations like ours. So those are concerns, but I think drilling down primarily, we want to make sure that whether it's tax credits or anything, that they do not in any way make provisions for abortion to be funded.
When you talk with others within the pro-life community, what are you hearing about in terms of the increased attention from the White House? I mean, is this seen as a positive thing for you guys?
Most of the people in that room, people that you would know, were optimistic from the standpoint of talking to a vice president who has a long track record when he served in the House of Representatives of being pro-life. Kellyanne Conway, who is a committed pro-lifer, who was there as well. I think there was a sense of optimism, but our real concern ultimately will come down in the Senate. I think that that's where we have a smaller majority and where we might have people that might even consider themselves pro-life but would be willing to not support this piece of legislation because of other concerns, if they're more free market concerns. So we're prayerful that people will respond, and particularly on the Senate side. I think that if people are listening, in addition to visiting us at Human Coalition to get more information, I think that they should contact their senators to make sure that those on the Senate side prepare now so that they actually have a piece of legislation and can support a piece of legislation that would not have any provisions for abortion in it.
Still a long way to go to get there. Reverend Dean Nelson, National Outreach Director for Human Coalition. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks, Wyatt.